If you want, that's fair enough.
Never used it.
Nice pink culture there. Don't put me in the middle.
Go on, if you want. Shocking. Just a quick message for those who've entered via the back. If you want headsets for the translation, you need to come to the front.
Yeah, that's just
Expensive.
Supposed to be able to apply. Do you want to apply to me? Just make it.
Yeah, I'll ask. Hello everyone. Just sorry to interrupt. We do have some special devices for those who are hard of hearing, and perhaps it then works in conjunction with the hearing aids. So a couple of them have gone out. I don't know if anybody else would benefit from one. If so, if you have a word with Lynn Wayne, please. Otherwise, you can carry on for just a couple of minutes because we'll be starting very soon. Has everyone got headsets who needs them? That's your last question.
No, I thought there's a couple coming in from the car park.
Right. You don't need to be deathly quiet at this point, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Well, let's try that again. Good morning, everybody. We're running a tight ship today. It's lovely to see everybody. Thank you all for gathering together for our Presbyteral Synod today. Just a couple of words before we get into meeting proper. Just word of instruction really on the headsets. They are really straightforward. When we need to use them, just you open them up and put them in your ears. And as long as it's on channel 1, it'll work. Okay? We will test it in a minute because I'm going to do my formal introduction in Welsh. So that's going to test my phonetics out, but we'll test it in a minute. Just to say, if you're here for the first time, I'm conscious there are a couple, Manu, Ian, anybody else here for the first time? Oh, James, of course, yes. And hello, welcome. And Alison. Alison's here as well. But you'll need a headset. There you go. Brilliant. Thank you. Right, I'm going to encourage you to put your headsets on because I'm going Gymraeg. Did everyone hear that? Yes. Very good. Croeso ffrindiau. Croeso I gyfarfod I steddfodiad gweinidogion synod i'r eglwys feddwdistaidd yng Nghymru. Croeso I fenni ac diolch yn fawr i'r eglwys feddwdistaidd Stryd y Castells. Mae ein gyfarfod yn amser pwysig ac arbennig. Byddwn ni'n clywed o gweinidogion sy'n eistedd I lawer ac yn clywed i'r isgrifau cofa. Dyn ni'n gobeithio bydd y cyn cael amser dda. I'm going to hand over to Jenny. Diolch yn fawr.
Bore da. Bore da. Good morning. We are going to pray together now. Our devotions this morning will be in both Welsh and English. There'll be a reflection in Welsh, so you'll need your translation headsets for that. And the reflection will actually be interjected with English for those who are watching on the live stream who may appreciate that. And following the reflection, we'll be singing a hymn in Welsh. And thank you to James for playing for us as we sing together. Gweddïwn, let us pray. Almighty and merciful God, you hate nothing that you have made and forgive the sins of all who are penitent. Create in us new and contrite hearts, so that when we turn to you and confess our sins, we may receive your full and perfect forgiveness. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. O drigarog arglwydd, erfynu yn arnat ganiataeth bobl ras I wrth sefyll temptasiynau'r byd ac yn awd ar diafol, ac a ffyr galon a meddwl dy ddilyn di, yr unig Duw, drwy Iesu Grist ein harglwydd. Amen. Our reading is from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 3 and verses 5 to 14. I'm reading in Welsh, but thank you to, don't take any notice of that, it was a typo. We're actually going not just 2 verses, we are going further than that. And thanks to Hugo for the translation you will see on the screen. Bu Moses yn ffyddlon yn holl dydd Dduw fel gwas, I ddwyn tystiolaeth i'r pethau roedd Duw yn mynd i'w llyfaru. Ond mae Crist yn ffyddlon fel mab sydd â rheolaeth ar dydd Dduw. Ac ni yw ei dief, os daliwn ein gafael yn y gobaith yr ydym yn hyderu ac yn ymffrostio ynddo. Gan hynny, fel y mae'r ysbryd glân yn dweud, heddiw, os gwrandewch ar ei lais, peidiwch a chaledi'ch calonnau fel yn y gwrthryfel, y nydd y profi yn yr anialwch, lle y gosododd ei chnafiaid fi a'r brawf am profi, ac y gwelsan fy ngweithredoedd am 20 mlynedd. Dyna pam y digiais wrth y genhedlaeth honno, a dweud, y maent yn wastad yn gyfeiliorni yn eu calonnau, ac nid ydynt yn gwybod fy ffyrdd. Felly, tyngais yn fynig, ni chan fydd ddod I mewn i'n gorffwysfa. Gwyliwch, gyfeillion, na fydd y neb ohonoch byth galon ddrwg angen rheidio, I beri iddo gefnu ar y Duw byw. Yn hytrach, cael ynogwch eich gilydd bob dydd, tra gelwy'r hun heddiw, rhag I neb ohonoch gael ei galedu gan dwyll pechod. Oherwydd yr ydym ni bellach yn gyd gyfranogion â Christ, os glynon yn dyn hyd y diwedd wrth ein hyder cyntaf. Tymor y grawys. Tymor y grawys. I fi, mae'n dymor anodd, tymor heriol. Dwi'n falch bob amser I gyrraedd Sul y Pasg, a ni dim ond oherwydd cael bwyta siocled eto, ar ôl rhoi'r gorau oedd am 6 wythnos. Mae pobl yn dweud wrthym ni, tymor o'r advent, tymor y Nadolig, your busy time, vicar. Ac ydy, ond fel arfer, mae advent yn dymor hapus. Tymor canu carolau, tymor dathlu. Dwi'n profi'r grawys fel tymor gwaith caled, yn teithio trwy'r anialwch efo Iesu ein hunain ac yn cyd-deithio efo pobl eraill. Dwi wir wedi blino erbyn Sul y Pasg I siarad yn bersonol. Pooped. So it's Lent, and I find Lent hard work myself. By the time we get to Easter Sunday, I'm tired. Os dydy bod yn hymor y grawys ddim yn ddigon, dyn ni nid yn gwybod am sefyllfa'r byd ar hyn o bryd. Mae'n fyd llawn tensiwn, brwydro, ansicrwydd, risg, sy'n ychwanegu at sut dwi'n teimlo, a chythau hefyd, mae'n bosib. Os dyn ni'n ychwanegu sefyllfa'r eglwys ar hyn o bryd, a sut mae pobl wedi blino o hyd, a sut mor anodd yw bod yr eglwys yn ein dyddiau ni, a heriau gweinidogaethu yn ein hoes ni, wel, mae gennym ni sefyllfa a hanner. Mewn sefyllfa felly, dwi'n gallu teimlo fy nghalon yn caledu weithiau, a dwi'n gwybod fy mod i'n cael fy nhemtio I edrych I ffwrdd. Dydy o ddim yn ffordd neis I fod. And to being in the season of Lent, at the present situation of the world and the church and the challenges of ministry today, and I personally sometimes feel my heart hardening and feeling myself tempted to just look away. It isn't a nice way to be. Mae'n darlleniad allan o'r epistol at y Hebreaid yn dweud, peidiwch a chaledu'ch calonnau. Geiriau gwych, cyngor gwych, gochymyn gwych. Os, fel fi, dych chi'n cael eich temtio weithiau I galedu eich calon, just stopiwch. Dydy o ddim o les I chi, eich hunain, Mae'n teimlo'n afnadwy, dydy o ddim yn iach, ac y dweud y gwir, dydy o ddim fel chi, fel dwi'n eich nabod chi o gwbl. Dydy o ddim lle sy'n neb arall, chwaith, ar wahân i'r tywysogaethau ac awdurdodau sydd am i ni galedu ein calonnau. The letter to the Hebrews tells us not to harden our hearts, and that is great teaching. It doesn't do us or anybody else any good, except perhaps the principalities and powers that want us to be like that. Dwi ddim yn awgrymu ein bod ni am fod fel Pollyanna, glad, glad, glad. Ond, gadewch i ni gofio, hyd yn oed yn hymor y grawys, pobl y Pasg ydyn ni. Mae cariad Duw yng Nghrist yn gryfa nag unrhyw her a'n hawster ofn. Peidiwch a chaledu'ch calonnau. Gadewch i ni dderbyn calon gig ddiw. Nid calon gerig, calon lân yn llawn daioni. So I'm not suggesting that we become cheery, 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 but we are Easter people, even in Lent. God's love triumphs in Christ. So let's receive God's heart of flesh rather than a heart of stone, as in the hymn that we're going to sing together now. Nid yw'n gofyn bywyd moethus, a'r byd na'i berlau man, gofyn rwyf am galon hapus, calon honest, calon lân, an honest heart, a pure heart, a heart of flesh, of softness. And a bilingual blessing. Duw a bendithio'r byd. God bless the church. Duw a bendithio'r Eglwys Methodistaidd ym Mhrydain. God bless us as we gather together and bless those who are not able to be present. Duw a bendithio'n sgwrs ein cymdeithas ein haddoliad. God bless us in our synod this day and every day. Amen. Wel, diolch i Lynwen am y cyfieithu. Mae'n braf cael cwmni Lynwen bob amser. A dyn ni'n gwybod she's the best in the business. Felly diolch yn fawr iawn. Dwi am alw ar Catherine os gai. Os gweld i yn dda. A chedi Catherine Roby i croesawu ni i'r ben. Diolch.
Just a welcome to you all this morning. It's good to see you all, and I'm sorry that you're indoors on such a beautiful day. Simply to say, if you need toilets, then they're in the corridor behind me if you haven't already found them. We'll serve refreshments, tea and coffee and cake at lunchtime. If you haven't brought lunch with you, there are plenty of places to get something to eat in Abergavenny. And if you don't know the way, then just ask me. Okay, but welcome.
Diolch yn fawr. Diolch, Catherine, a diolch yn fawr iawn i'r ffrindiau yma sy'n mor gwrachsawus bob amser. Diolch yn fawr. Diolch. Mae'n braf cael ein ysgrifennydd y synod, James, wrth y bwrdd efo ni. A dwi'n troi at James rwan a Sky i rhoi gwybod i ni am unrhyw ymddiheuriadau neu trwyddedau sydd wedi cael eu derbyn os gweli di yn dda.
Bore da pawb, welcome, and it's good to be here. It's a cracking day in South Wales.
It's always like this down here.
It's always down south, yeah. I'm just saying. So okay, right. As you say, we have received, or we have been asked for dispensations for 23 presbyters, and welcome to those also who've given their apologies for being here in Abergavenny, but who are following us on the live stream. Notice-wise, we'll come back to this. If you are a presbyter in active service, then if you have travelled here on your own steam, then your circuits, I'm afraid, are picking up the tab for that. But if you are a supernumerary presbyter and wish to claim travel expenses, please come and see me at lunchtime, and I will make sure that all gets sorted for you. We will be having a retiring collection for the Fund for Presbyters and Deacons, so please, if you're able, give to that. And do we have any requests for correspondence to be sent to any of our brothers and sisters?
Two letters to two supernumeraries in the sponsing council, the Reverend John Jones and the Reverend Margaret Adams, who are struggling with health issues at the moment.
Great. Margaret Adams. Sorry.
And can we send a card to Jane Dowell, who will be associated with the widow of Reverend Anton Dowell?
Yeah. Certainly. I don't know, go on my list. Any? Nick. Oh, sorry, Nick.
Can we also send a card to Joan Warner in the Bangor Hollyoaks?
Yeah.
Who's broken her ankle recently, laid out. She might be with us, isn't it? I don't know.
You don't know. It's a mystery, isn't it? It's a mystery. James.
We send letters of greetings to the Reverend Ken Morgan and George Courtney.
Morgan, George Courtney. Any others? If at some point during the day you realise you've missed somebody, then please come and see me. I think I've got two requests to attend the presbyteral session of conference at the presbyter's own expense. That's the Reverends Marion Jones and Ruth G. Is there anybody else who wishes? Oh, come on.
Who couldn't enjoy a couple of nights in Telford?
Come on, Telford's a fab place. No. So does Synod agree that those are able to attend at their own expense? Yeah. I think that's pretty much all from me. Thank you. But as I say, if you think of somebody you need sending greeting to, please come and see me, and we'll make sure they get there. Thank you.
Diolch, James. Rydyn ni'n mynd I gael ein harwain rwan am rhyw awr, yr awr nesaf gan Andrew. Mwy na lai.
Well,
Okay, diolch.
yeah, well, we're 10 minutes ahead of the game, but I'm about to put a stop to that. So, first of all, we're going to be thinking about new proposals around stationing. There's been a big consultation happening across the connection. You may well have been asked to take part in that consultation and send comments in. The stationing group have been working through that. But I wanted really now just to share really two of the key strands of that. So we have a chance here as Presbyteral Synod to just think about that and discuss that. It's likely that these new proposals will come to conference this year, although I do happen to know there's at least one piece of work happening from the Law and Polity Committee which might put the brakes on. But certainly that's the intention is that the proposals will come to conference this year for acceptance. And it will fundamentally change the way that stationing has been happening recently. So there has been this review taking place. If we move on to the next slide, essentially these are the key principles underpinning the ideas behind this review. First of all, that we want integrity, grace, care and prayer throughout the process. Obviously, we recognise that. There's felt like there's been a greater need for transparency in the process, that people can see what's actually happening. Although obviously lots of work in the past has been done by a stationing matching group where the chairs gather together. Obviously, not everyone sees what goes on in that place. Obviously, throughout all of this, safe and non-discriminatory practice, processes and outcomes. There's a real desire as well also for greater agency for those who are participating, that those who, so the circuits can feel like they've got real agency in the process, and also presbyters who are in stationing might feel like they've got agency in the process. Obviously, as is the nature of our standing orders, that stationing falls to our lay members really in the circuits for shaping who are the staff that people want and are looking for. So full lay participation throughout. Appropriate subsidiarity. I've no idea what the word subsidiarity is in Welsh.
We'll come back to you.
No, that's fine. I mean, I barely know what it means in English, if I'm honest. So, but essentially, they're wanting the sort of the decision making to happen as close to the circuit as possible within that. So the circuit have some, as I say, it's an extension really of that agency. And then one of the key principles behind all of this was recognising that we do not have enough ministers for the number of stations every year. There's always a huge mismatch. It's normally at the moment about 2/3 of the number of ministers as there are the number of circuits looking for ministers. So it does mean obviously that there are increasing numbers of difficult to station areas. But and also, so that's one of the aspects of ministry where it's needed most, but also there is always the fear within stationing that the circuits who can afford more ministry get more ministry. And that's also a concern, obviously. So ministry where it's needed most is one of those key concerns within all this. Whether or not the proposals address those concerns is obviously something we can perhaps discuss today. But that's some of the principles underpinning all of this. Now, there are then two big areas where it's going to change. Reinvitation is one of those areas which, if you've ever been through a difficult reinvitation process, it can be utterly brutal. And we'll either know from first-hand experience, or we'll certainly know from sitting alongside colleagues who've gone through a really difficult reinvitation process, just how destructive this can be for people, whether it's through the sort of the consultation that takes place, whether it's through some of the feedback, whether it's through some of the conversations which are had, which can quite frankly be insulting, it is seen that re-invitation can be a really difficult process for people. And so one of the key areas where they've wanted to change the processes is in this idea around consultations at the end of your first 5 years, or consultations at the end of your next re-invitation, your next time period. The way they're planning to do this is through what's called an annual vocational conversation with a couple of circuit stewards. Now, the plan is that there will be a conversation at the end of the first year of a 5-year appointment, the middle year of the appointment, and then the penultimate year. So the year essentially you'd be having those consultations in the old systems and so forth. Those vocational conversations should then lead to directing the circuit. Is this a good fit for this presbyter's skills? And if so, obviously we might want to continue to use those. But obviously the circuit's involved in those, so it may well be that ministry is not being received in the same way. But the idea is we're going to get rid of that big consultation and replace it with these annual vocational conversations, which then help shape whether or not somebody is then re-invited. Now, there is a next slide. The chances of you able to read it are pretty slim because the writing's tiny. But essentially what this says is what happens once essentially those vocational conversations have taken place, which essentially is a recommendation will be made to the circuit meeting in the same way based on the outcomes of those conversations. Obviously, circuit meetings have still ultimately got the final decision on whether or not a re-invitation takes place. The CIC, for instance, or the CLT can also request further consultations done, so it won't just rest on the 2 circuit stewards holding those conversations. But there's then a process we work through, and then eventually, once the recommendation is made to the circuit meeting, ultimately the same rules around votes and so forth, and having to sort of oppose a recommendation if that's what you want to do, and given a certain periods of notice and so forth, that's all baked into the system. One of the other things in this as well, which people have really wanted to stress, is that whatever feedback is offered in these re-invitation processes, whether it's through the circuit stewards or whether further work is done at the circuit meeting and so forth, it has to be attributable feedback. Because too often, obviously, it's felt as though people have been anonymously making comments about somebody's ministry, and that can be so destructive because you've no way of knowing what the context is and where that's coming from. And so that's one of the key aspects of this as well. So that's the process around re-invitation. Rather than listening to me for another 5 minutes, I'm going to suggest we have a conversation at this point around this and see where people are at. I don't know, do we have a handheld, Catherine? It doesn't matter if we don't, it's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Any comments?
I think this is a bureaucratic nightmare. I think it places far too much on church stewards who are already struggling, and the assumption that you will have consistency. It does little to protect a presbyter who's in a situation where they've been sent to a circuit that is dysfunctional, and often they are having to sort out those very same circuit stewards. So how does that work? I think it's absolutely expecting too much of people who are not qualified to do it.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the paper does speak about training that's offered, but in terms of consistency and so on, yeah.
People like all of us in circuits know what people are saying about the amount of training that they're expected to do. And if you want them to do more, I think they're going to start running for the hills.
Other thoughts? Phil?
Sounds like under this new system you could end up with having similar consultations to what we're having now, but you do it 3 times.
I think the idea that you don't want to get bitten at the end of a 5-year period or 4-year period when you do your conversations, that somebody's held something over you for those 4 years and you haven't had any idea that there are a number of people in your church or circuit that are thinking you do this wrong or that wrong or the other wrong, but they haven't brought it to you. And that idea of open and transparent conversations happening throughout the term of office there, I think is positive.
I agree with that, except I think one of the problems that we have, is saying we'll do it then and then and then, when really the process ought to be continuous. It should be, the support should be continuous, the challenge should be continuous. You shouldn't be saying now is the time to do it. We should be expecting that we receive feedback and support, and we need to, in order to do that, you need to set up a structure to do it. It's a pattern for doing it, so that we are aware at all times of the strengths and weaknesses and what can be done, instead of seeing it as
Snapshots.
yeah.
There was an earlier draft of this, which I know doesn't entirely address the question, which had an annual vocational conversation, and they've had to step back from that because of the bureaucratic nightmare that's been.
That's still the same issue of snapshots rather than continuous support.
Following on from that, it seems that the basic problem is that we're not good within churches at communicating, and as leaders we may not be good in setting the right signals that allow people to make critical feedback. So will this be kind of supplemented by ongoing, learning about how people can be more vulnerable, how people can be more open and less frightened of giving feedback and receiving it? I mean, these are just particular pinch points, but it seems to me it's a more general issue, just with people generally trying to share that information.
Yeah. They are hoping through this process that it would enable people to reflect better and share better.
Is this then a two-way process? The minister is able to feed back through the circuit.
Yes.
I mean, as far as it pertains, obviously to stationing. I mean, obviously, as presbyters, we always have the ultimate choice of not staying in at a particular appointment and moving on. So, I think in terms of does this actually enable us to have better conversations about ministry in general in the circuits, I think that's an open question, obviously. Jenny?
I recognise that we're having a conversation about this from our perspective as presbyters, but we are connectional people, and thinking of the whole connection, I've always been aware that there are parts of the connection and there are certain communities, certain circuits, that just do not attract ministers, do not retain ministers, struggle generally under whatever system of stationing. And my personal fear is, having served in a number of those, let's face it, my fear is that this system won't do them any more favours. I want to be proven wrong, desperately want to be proven wrong, but that's my little, that's the butterflies in my tummy about it.
Is there going to be opportunity for other parallel processes to feed into this thinking within CDIM?
Yeah, I mean, MDR is the key part, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is extra work in the processes around that.
And my other question is, who chooses a circuit steward?
I don't think that's made clear at this stage. I mean, obviously it would need to be people that you were willing to work with and have those conversations with, but the danger with that is if you pick the 2 circuit stewards you get on with, and then you're still blindsided when you get to this decision point. So that's, I have to say, my biggest hesitation with all of this is that I honestly believe if a circuit is capable of having annual vocational conversations well, it's probably capable of having a consultation done well. Those circuits which couldn't do the consultation well probably couldn't do the vocational conversations well, and I suspect we'll still end up in all sorts of painful places really with this. We just may have more opportunity for the pain to be shared really, but we will see. Anyway, so that's the first part. That was the good news. Then we move on to essentially the matching process. So if we could have the next slide at this point. Sorry, one back if that's possible. So, in terms of the actual matching process, what's proposed is circuits will draw up profiles for a particular appointment. Those profiles will not be dissimilar to the current profiles across 2 pages on A4. You'll note I've only said circuits will draw up profiles at this point because presbyters won't be drawing up profiles in the same way. Now, there will be some scrutiny on those profiles. There's meant to be more scrutiny, which enables us to say, actually, that circuit's got lots of presbyters. As much as it wants another one because it can afford another one, we don't think with the scarce resources in Methodism, you can have one. And so there'll be opportunities to cut profiles out. Whether or not that will happen in practice, because which district's going to want to say to its circuit, no, you can't have somebody, but we will see. There'll be more flexibility around how long those profiles can be. So we're thinking probably appointments from 3 to 7 years. Just if there is a big piece of work that needs doing, a longer appointment might be appropriate and so forth. But once the profiles have been agreed, they'll be published as they are now in a book. Obviously, they're not published in an open way. They only go to the people who receive them. But they will be published. Those presbyters who are then in stationing at that point will be invited to submit expressions of interest to up to 3 of the appointments they see in the book. So it won't be about creating sort of your indicative lists where you give your top 5 and so forth. You'll be invited to submit expressions of interest for 3 that you see in the book. And actually, what you would then write is, rather than writing a generic profile, you would then submit your expression of interest based on that particular appointment. So you might fancy that, and you would say, I want to do this, and these are why I would be able to do this. So you'd be sort of tailoring your expression of interest to the appointment and explaining why you might be able to do something otherwise. Okay? On top of that, there will be each year a small number of priority appointments, but they're talking about 3 or 4, and they're really talking about those incredibly difficult areas to station every year where there's really a real struggle. Now, it's not going to address that fundamental issue of that ministry isn't always in the places we need it, because there's only going to be 3 or 4 every year. We're probably talking about islands, for instance, or the top of Scotland or things like that, where you just, for us, it ought to be South West Wales, because we've had the same profile in for 3 years in a row and not had a single expression of interest. But those priority appointments are not really going to address that need of we're not putting our ministers where we need them. And there are, for instance, this is something we feel quite keenly here in Wales, because obviously we're not sure people are coming across the border at the rate that we need them to, essentially. So it's a concern for us. But as I say, there'll be 3 or 4 priority appointments, and actually it won't just be the presbyters who are in stationing who can express an interest in these priority appointments. Every presbyter in full connection would be able to express an interest in these priority appointments and then submit an expression of interest if they wanted to. So, for instance, if your dream appointment comes up and you're 2 years into a current appointment, you could go for your dream appointment. Okay, so that's that's going to be the key thing with how things are done in terms of the profiles. Next slide, if that's possible. Now, once all those expressions of interest have come in, there'll be some connectional scrutiny will still take place or whatever, but ultimately, if your circuit is in stationing, all the expressions of interest that have been made will come to you, you will review them, and your circuit will say, well, we're interested in this person, we're interested in that person, but we don't want to touch that person with a barge pole, yeah? Or some theological term appropriate for the occasion, yeah? That would then essentially narrow down the list of people who are interested in particular appointments. There would then come a matching process. Now, essentially, if there was one expression of interest which had been accepted by the circuit for one particular appointment, it's likely that that match will then be made. If obviously there's multiple expressions of interest for a particular appointment, then obviously the group, which is called the SMBMC, Stationing and Policy Matching Committee, I wouldn't memorise those initials just yet because it's already changed multiple times in the process, yeah, would then be making those groups. Now, one of the things that we want to particularly flag up here is, because it has caused concern up to this point, is there would only be one regional chair who would be part of the SPMC rather than every chair being in the room when the matching is made. That's obviously causes some concerns because obviously your regional chair isn't going to know the people in the same way that your local chair would. Now, obviously I'm only 18 months in and I'm still getting to know people, but those who are in stationing, we tend to work quite hard on building those relationships and understanding what people want. And that's obviously, those conversations are going to be hard to have in the same level of detail across a region in the same way. So, but those matches are then made. Now, obviously, you're all sat there thinking, well, there'll be appointments which haven't been matched in that first round because there were no expressions of interest. You're absolutely right. Essentially, what will then happen is the first round will happen. Once those matches have stuck, or not stuck, as it were, then there'll be a next round, and new expressions of interest will be made. Then there'll be, and so on, until as many appointments as there are filled with as many ministers as there are to fill them. That is generally the process for the new stationing. Comments?
Well, I had a question. So you said, if your dream appointment comes up, you can throw your hat in the ring. So will all presbyters get all circuit profiles, or will you only get the priorities?
Only the priority.
Okay.
How does this fit with our ecclesiology as ascending church and not a church? And is this not just a cost-cutting exercise?
I don't know if it's a cost-cutting exercise. What I can tell you in terms of ecclesiology is that I know there's a piece of work happening in the Law and Polity Committee, which is essentially around the Supreme Court case, which says we're not employees of the church, we're essentially in a covenant relationship. The concern may be that this process becomes more like an employment process than it does become about a stationing in a covenant relationship, in which case we're not going to, we really wouldn't touch it with a barge pole, because obviously overturning the Supreme Court decision puts us in all sorts of bother. So I think that question is to be tested.
But it does, and one of the things that was always explained to me when I was in training was that one of the strengths was that we were ascending church, which allowed us to stand over perhaps the local issues that were not cool,
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for any stationing process at the moment is the fact that people are becoming less itinerant. That's where the fact that we are ascending church is getting harder and harder. Now, obviously, our process is recognised that for a season, people may have particular requirements to be in particular locations, and that's fine. We recognise that. The trouble is, for some people, that season is the duration of ministry, and it gets harder and harder in that case. The reality was, when we did the stationing round this year, I think there were about 6 people who were willing to come across the border. across, and that made obviously stationing really hard. Now, fortunately, we were able to get 3 of them, but that's where we're at, and it's really hard, therefore.
Yes, I think you're answering the questions that I was going to raise. My first question was why? Why the effort for doing all of this? I came into ministry as an itinerant minister, and as far as I've been able, I've been obedient to that call. The limitations I put on stationing have been purely random, and to any less extent I've gone where sent. This just seems to unpick that whole principle. And the reason you don't get people in South Wales is because you don't send them. If itinerant ministers are obedient to the ministry, they go when they're sent. And I don't know why we need this whole effort, because for me, as I said, it's a simple fact that I do as I'm told.
Yeah, Hugh John.
It could be any circuit, but you've already mentioned the circuit that's hardest to station in. But in that circuit, Jeff sees his dream appointment come up, which is to serve in the Abergavenny, and he accepts it, and that match is made. How does the circuit that is then left, that you can't station in, cope with it?
You can then enter stationing at that point. However, that point is after the first round of stationing, where most ministers have been matched.
Does that circuit then become a priority? Because in our case, it will be left without a president.
Yeah.
But full-time secretary.
Essentially, I don't think the paper says as much, and obviously, yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath. Is probably where I'm going with that.
I mean, I hope Jeff doesn't go to that area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we need a conversation, Jeff? And Andy.
Thank you, Andrew. A couple of points if I may. I'm wondering whether a minister who's going into stationing would currently just write one detailed profile, may in this new system end up writing 3, then possibly 6 or possibly 9 job applications. The second point, though, is that does the process enable the Methodist Church, where there are circuits who clearly have the desire to employ a minister, they also have a budget, they have a mission plan, does that finally enable us perhaps to go to other denominations? I think particularly the church in Scotland who put an embargo on the recruitment of other ministers and who are having to lay off many of their own potential. Are we finally going to say we've got circuits with money, we've got mission and ministry that wants to happen? Will we take the courage to, dare I say, recruit ministers from other denominations and actively bring people into our Methodist family? And finally, thirdly, I think the theological equivalent of large upon might be national upon.
I think the question of other denominations, I mean, obviously, there are possibilities around authorised presbyters and so forth. My gut feeling is, though, none of the other denominations are blessed with a surplus. I mean, that's the reality. I mean, we've got conversations happening with the URC around different appointments, and I mean, the Bridgend United area could ask for a URC minister, but I wouldn't be holding my breath anytime soon, because I know what ministry looks like for the URC at the moment. So it's there are challenges everywhere, obviously.
In case I missed it, what specific? Because one of the problems with trying to get presbyters that circuits face is that they just can't afford it. How does this adjust that system? Because obviously those circuits that can afford presbyters are the ones who are present in the stationing process from the outset. So there's a lot of financial inequality embedded in the way we hold funds within the church, which this at this time doesn't seem to be addressing unless I missed it.
My hesitation is because I'm wondering if I've missed something in fine print. If it is being addressed, but the money question I think doesn't go away, if it is being addressed, it's that district scrutiny of the district saying, well, this is where we really think ministry needs to be. But ultimately, the money question will, I mean, other circuits are not going to pay for somebody's ministry down the road, are they? So,
I mean, they should.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I know this is part of the conversation, but if you've got profiles that aren't consistently being filled from a minister's point of view, that's often because lots of churches are involved in just being able to put enough money together, and that's not an attractive appointment for a presbytery when they're looking after 10, 12 chapels.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. You've alluded to this in some ways already, but some of the language, covenant or is it employment, profiles being put aside with a barge pole. I just wonder at what point the lawyers get involved in, big time, whether we're just causing ourselves more and more problems.
Yeah, sorry, Keith, I'm looking at you.
Just a question that springs to mind, and certainly Stephen will remember when I came here, there weren't any jobs in any of the places that I wanted. So I was sent, and I'm happy I've been sent, that was great. But
We're happy you were as well, Keith.
But I was sent, I would not have applied to come here.
Yeah.
So what happens in that situation when there's nothing in the area that you think you want, either the type of ministry or the geography of ministry, what happens then?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the truth is, I honestly believe that when the chairs gather to match people to appointments, knowing what they know about the people, we often make very good appointments. Now, it may well be that the profiles don't necessarily match reality, and that's always going to be a challenge within this process. And then that's when bad appointments happen. Yeah, I think those matches which are done off people's lists, so it's not on anybody's indicative list, but actually it's a really good fit, I think they're very positive. I mean, obviously, I don't think it would be, you didn't put Welsh Bull and Bro Havering down, but I suspect they didn't, because they were looking for a superintendent and it wasn't on your list and so forth, so it's hard. But
is there going to be space in that for someone who is willing to go anywhere? You know, I'm from the UMC, which is essentially direct stationing. I came in as an MOCC, which was direct stationing. And I'm blessed that, we don't have kids in school, we don't have family to be near. Like, when I moved, we are truly willing to go anywhere. And the idea of having to choose my top 3 and see what happens, like, I'd rather just be directly stationed. Is there a way, to just offer that?
I don't think there is, essentially, in these processes, which is a real shame.
Yeah.
It's a real shame. I have to say, if you're willing, in the current system, if you're willing to go anywhere, you'll be on every indicative list in the world, because that's what happens. Yeah. If somebody doesn't express a geographical restriction, then actually they end up on about 25 indicative lists, right. Which, if that's what you're going to do and it's going to fall to me to match you, I'm going to be busy that time, because you end up speaking to every appointment. But obviously that's fine, Bethany. Don't let me dissuade you from doing that. Sorry, Keith.
Just thinking about appointments and the writing of them, and there's conversations I've had elsewhere, sometimes, quite often, a circuit's vision of itself doesn't always come to fruition. So within those profiles that they put up, will there be a list of expectations? Because that's just as important as what you think the ministry is. So can you make sure that there's like a list of expectations of the minister that goes alongside that? I know we can't do job descriptions, but if you've got some expectations, at least you can say, well, actually, I've got 3 kids, there's no way I can do that. No thanks.
Yeah. I don't think they're planning to change the circuit profiles enormously at this stage. I think, obviously, there needs to be a summary of what people are looking for, but yeah. Did I see one more hand?
Well, I was just going to say that if I was still in a stage where it happened, I'd be doing exactly that and leaving it an open pitch.
Yeah.
That's what I came into.
Yeah.
That's the call of the ministry, that's the vocational aspect, and that's the obedience aspect, and that's that call of God and the openness to allow the Spirit of God to move. This just seems too prescriptive.
Yeah. James?
I just kind of like to say that those of us who put geographical restrictions on our station profiles, albeit quite wide, many of us did so for sound reasons. And it's around caring responsibilities for elderly parents, and it's often around family issues and stuff. So, you know, God. All I want to say is God can work through somebody who puts no geographical restrictions, and I equally believe God can work through people who put some geographical restrictions. And for a lot of us, it will be just a season. And equally, a lot of us have spouses that work, and therefore there needs to be a place. Part of that is making sure that they have a place to be able to carry on their ministry. So,
you might be looking at...
No, I was looking at you, sorry.
My response to that is, if God is able to work through my openness, He's equally able to work through your restrictions.
Yeah, no, that's what I said. That's what I said. Yeah.
So don't put any and allow that process to happen.
Dallas.
I was going to say pretty much what James has just said. And I just would, you know, I think the world is changing in terms of if we want to invite and encourage younger presbyters into ministry, we have to recognise that those presbyters are probably married or in partnerships with people who are working and have geographical limitations for whatever reason. And yes, absolutely, God can direct and make way for these people to offer ministry into the Methodist Church, as you know, as I'm sure we've all got examples in our minds. But we do need to have an opportunity of encouraging people that the Methodist Church is listening to what current cultural requirements are for family situations.
Yeah. What I will say is questions around itinerancy really aren't a big part of why they're trying to change this. I mean, that's the reality. This system won't make anybody any more itinerant, essentially. And obviously the questions that Bethany's raised, for instance, it will be difficult for somebody who truly wants to go where the church needs her to know how to apply to these appointments. So I think the questions around itinerancy, one of the things which has happened recently, sorry, I'm going off piece here, but one of the things which has happened recently is the Connection have made it easier for people to apply to go through candidating to be in local appointment, essentially. Then we're not using that language anymore, but essentially what that did in the first year was we got far more people who candidated that year than we have for years and years. The year before, I think there were 6 people who got through candidating. The next year, there was 31, I believe, or something like that. So those figures are huge, really, in terms of the difference. What the impact that's going to be on the church, we don't know yet, because those people are not in circuit yet. They're still going through training. But obviously, if people really are tied to a particular location, when ministry needs to change, that can be really hard as well. And it does mean if there's fewer and fewer ministers who are willing to move, it's fine if you've got a minister who wants to be in your area, but if you haven't, then how do you address that? So I think there are open questions there around that, but ultimately I hear the need. Obviously, people have needs, and it's important for us to adapt, really. Keith?
Just on what you just said, does this apply to probationers?
In terms of... I don't know. I don't think it talks about that in the... I think that would still be matched differently. I think because there's such sensitivity around making sure those are good appointments, that I think that's more closely scrutinised, in theory.
So they get the good appointments.
Yeah, I think that's an open question, as everybody in the room would probably testify. But so that's the new stationing processes. So based on this conversation, I'm just going to go to conference and vote yes. Is that all right? Yes. Does that capture the mood of the room? There are 2 things which I think might kill this. One is obviously the Supreme Court decision may have a huge impact and would finish this off in a heartbeat. Whether or not we've got that legal advice, because it's going to be complicated by the time of conference, is an open question. the reality is we've sat in a room of chairs discussing this, and we know there's all sorts of questions, and obviously I've heard all sorts of questions this morning as well. I'm not sure this is getting through, essentially, for any number of reasons, but yeah, we will see. But please do continue to comment when opportunities arise. It's really important that we do. Dallas, sorry.
So let me just ask, if we think that this isn't getting through, are we happy with the current system?
Be happy or content?
Now, I think the reality is, and the report says this, I think there are all sorts of questions about the current system, and there are all sorts of disgruntlement about the current system.
I think the whole EDI process has some bearing on this, particularly when ministers could be upset or the system not work and people come away feeling very distraught and unhappy. Particularly the issue about anonymous comments being made. I think that's something that does need to be addressed, even if we don't go through this. The parts of this, I think, which are fundamental to our well-being and the well-being of our nation going forward.
Keith?
Just, is it possible to separate what Jeff just said? Is it possible to separate them out and have re-invitation as a separate issue to the stationing? Because I think the re-invitation, I appreciate that, and I think it's very useful in lots of different ways. Whereas the stationing side of it, I would say, if I do get a re-invitation, I'm very, very glad that I wasn't in stationing before.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the way the paper will be written, the resolutions will be separate. So, yeah. I don't think it's seen as you have to accept this whole package.
I don't think you can make any real fundamental change unless you really tackle how appointments are financed. Follow the money.
Yeah. I know it's been part of the conversation, but obviously they're not easy issues to resolve, essentially.
Well, you could see how important where the money resides when we had that pension scheme.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are aware of it, and then actually had the circuits and districts pledging from their reserves. I mean, the amount of money in reserves that people are sitting on is astronomical, and it's very widely different over across the connection, and there are huge inequalities present, and unless we get that sorted out as the cornerstone, almost no policy is going to be as good as we'd like it to be.
Yeah. I do have to say, Wales is one of the countries that's sat on an awful lot of reserves. We have substantial reserves at the synod level, but also across the circuits there are substantial reserves. I mean, it is affected by the fact that the Cymru circuit had a building in the middle of Westminster which raised some funds. But sorry, Marylebone. I think the principle of how much money they got for it is still the same. But yeah. Well, thank you. It's really helpful to hear that conversation. And I tried not to be too sceptical. I think the reality is we do need to do something. I think Dallas' point's right, is the system isn't working as it should. We do need to do something. It's just whether or not we've ended up in the right place is the conversation to be had moving forward. Yeah.
So, Andrew, I mean, are we to agree to this, or let's go forward?
There is, I mean, it would have no standing whatsoever. I mean, it's helpful for those of us who were obviously part of the team going to conference to have heard this conversation and some of the concerns. Absolutely, it is. But yeah. So the next thing is new places for new people. So next one. So the God for All strategy. We're called to be a growing, inclusive, evangelistic and justice-seeking church. Now, essentially the biggest paper which came to Methodist Conference back in Leeds in 2024 was around the God for All strategy and the God for All strategy for the next phase of the church's life. So the next slide, Essentially, the introduction to the report says this: clarification of the ways in which the God for All strategy is shaping the life, understanding, mission and witness of the Methodist Church and its people, especially in the areas of evangelism, pioneering and planting, discipleship and missional growth and leadership. You can all read, so I don't know what I'm reading to you. It calls on the conference to reaffirm the strategy of the next session in its life from 2025 until 2032, the centenary of the Deed of Union. So 2032 is seen as a key date, really, for our thinking moving forward. And obviously, the centenary of the Deed of Union is kind of it's somewhat of an arbitrary date, but it's a date, and it's a date into the future, which I think gives us a sense of where will we be essentially in 7 years' time, which I'm sure you all had all sorts of thoughts going through your head when I asked that question, where will we be as a church in 7 years' time? Essentially, what was decided at conference was, over the next 7 years, up to 2032, essentially the bulk of our financing, which goes into work which we can essentially choose where we spend it, because obviously some connectional funding goes in areas which it has to be spent. But where we choose where we can spend it is essentially going to be around the God for All strategy. The next slide may or may not be legible, but it kind of set up in my mind, this is where we're going to planning to spend our money. Okay? So over the next 7 years, is there 7 years? Yeah, 7 years on there. We're planning to spend up to £22 million on new places for new people, church at the margins. 6.8 million on evangelism, missional growth and leadership 2.4, discipleship almost 5 million, ongoing support for salaries 3.6, and then partnership and so forth. Across the whole lot of the God for All strategy, we're spending £40 million essentially, which essentially, as I say, is the bulk of our money that we're choosing to spend in a particular way, which essentially means that new places for new people and the God for All strategy is at the heart of who we want to be as the Methodist Church over the next 7 years. Now, one of the things the slide doesn't say is, in Wales, we've had an opportunity to establish new places for new people projects across the country, and so far we've been struggling to get them established. We've had up to £1 million in match funding to spend, of which we've still got 800,000 left. And actually, if we're going to spend that 800,000, we need to have done so by August 2026. So we're still hoping that these projects will come to fruition, but we know through the experience of the last couple of years that circuits are just struggling to do the work in establishing good projects and so forth. And we all know the challenges of circuit life, don't we? That's the reality. And so doing those innovative pieces of work and establishing these projects is proving difficult. So I think that's something that's been experienced across the Connection as well. So one of the things that Connection also have agreed to fund is on the next slide, which is from September 25, so at the end of this connectional year, every district is supposed to have an MP district lead. And it says there, the purpose of this role to develop the growing movement of new places for new people by acting as an accompanist to circuits and practitioners, provide vital support in the early stages, help to continue to develop these, evaluation, sustain, and so on. Now, as a district, the Connection have given each district a half-time appointment for this MP lead. They're going to give us the money for it. We as a district have already said we would like to make that a full-time role, and so essentially match funding it with district funding. So at some point soon, we will be starting the process of recruiting this MP district lead, who will then help the circuits to do this, okay? So that's one piece of news. As well as the MP district lead, there was also a second role that the Connection are going to pay for. Now, we need to choose whether we're going to start this in 2025 or if we're going to start this in 2026. We're probably of the mindset that it may need to be 2026 because obviously we still need to sort out the MP district lead. But on the next slide is this faith-rooted community organising lead as well. Faith-rooted community organising, I'll let you read it. It is ultimately about how we're going to be active in our communities and how that's going to build faith on different ways. I sometimes think of this as the works of mercy from the means of grace, perhaps. But if the next slide will also tell us that what we'll be looking for the faith-rooted community organiser to do, role will be key to supporting existing churches and new Christian communities to make connections as part of their discipleship and core mission to be justice-seeking. So it's putting that justice-seeking part of our call as the Methodist Church at the heart of all that we do. Thoughts? Yeah, lay or ordained.
I think it's brilliant, right? And I think essentially it's what all of us are trying to do even now without all these extra roles, because it's kind of Methodist principle that we live out our faith in community and social justice issues and all the rest of it. My issue, and I raised it when we were together as superintendents, and it's still my issue. I'm trying to understand where the Methodist Church sees us going, and it's about something as basic as how we are currently set up, and how we fund ourselves. You know, in the Cardiff Circuit, we've got a very active pioneer minister who's doing great things with MPNP and building up communities outside of the inherited church, as we're calling it. But it's very clear that those utterly new people coming in, not steeped in church ways, and are very often people who would not have the means anyway to put significant amounts of money in an offering plate or equivalent. And what I can't quite get my head around is, where does the Methodist Church, have they thought through what this is going to look like in the future? Because at the moment, these are all paid roles, whether they are ordained. This is what people are doing for a living. And, down the road, how are we going to sustain that? That's what's really niggling me. If they can tell me that, absolutely, utterly fine. It's brilliant. It's God's work. Absolutely. And I'm fully, on board with the idea of doing things in new ways to spread the gospel. I'm just trying to see organisationally what it looks like.
How is this different from when we used to have knowing boundaries with neighbours? And one of the difficulties with these roles is, just as Kathy was saying, they actually don't sit into our governance and policy structures. So you pay someone to do something, they don't know who they can command to do things, and all sorts of bits and pieces. Somehow when I'm looking at this, I remember that the reason I came to full-time ministry was to do that. But that is my job already, right? So why is it I'm not able to do that? And that's because I've got so much admin to do and so many people to train and so many forms to do. Why wouldn't that money be better spent on giving ministers a release from the kind of bureaucratic stuff so they could actually go and do what they were called to do?
I don't know if this is the answer the connection would give. I think there's an element of this of everybody in the Methodist Church can see that we're in a very difficult position and the direction of travel is harder. Yeah, we all recognise that. There are ongoing conversations aside from this process around finance and what our finances are going to look like in 2032. They won't look great. And there are conversations happening about the size of the connectional team and so forth, and there are conversations about what things are going to look like on the ground. I have significant concerns about what happens in particular places when a circuit can no longer be as big as a single station, but actually is miles and miles away from anywhere else where there are no mergers possible. And the reality is we have that in Wales. It will become a real issue very soon, yeah, or in the not too distant future. I think the reason the Methodist Church, to a large extent, is spending the money this way is it's the question of if we are going to exist, then let's make it mean something. Let's see if we can change some lives, I think.
But I wish we could be really honest about that, you know.
Well, I'm not saying that is the connectional position, put so bluntly.
Because that's fine, Andrew, you know, let's change lives. But let us also say to people who are coming in to ministry or who have a significant amount of time left in ministry, you need to start to learn to make tents because we might not be paying your stipend in 10 years' time. You know, that's the level of honesty we need to have.
I think the challenge there is that we're not a poor church, but the money's not necessarily where we're going to need it. Because there is money, there's lots of money in property still, yeah. I mean, the reality is we saw some figures recently. At the moment, we've got 3,500 churches across the UK. I mean, pre-COVID, it was about 5,500. So there's already 2,000 churches, however much they've raised in terms of finance, sat in account somewhere. In 7 years' time, how many will 3,500 have become, and so on and so forth. So we're not a poor church, but there is an element of we're going to spend the family silver to do mission, I think, which I think is probably the right instinct, even if in 2032 we look at it and think, well, we're nearer the end than we intended to be, but I don't know. I didn't mean to enter into this depressing phase, but we've ended up here. This is supposed to be positive. We're talking about new places for new people.
Am I missing something? Or is it not the case that the most likely people with suitable, dare I say, profile for roles like these might actually be ordained presbyters or deacons? In which case, and as has been said, that's what many of us thought we were doing anyway for most of our ministry.
Andrew, many of us work in two denominations. There's been no mention of ecumenical partners in this. Just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything, sorry, it's a very long paper. Essentially, the Methodist Church would always say everything we want to do as a church should be done alongside others. I mean, that's the reality. We cannot be the church on our own anymore. Not that we ever were, but... Dallas, sorry.
Yeah, so coming back to whether presbyters will be able to apply for this, I mean, I think they'll probably be discouraged because we need presbyters in stations. So that's the first thing I'd say, even though that's what we would want to do. And then secondly, and this is perhaps like, I'm going to make a point that we can't do anything about, but I've been involved with a proposal in Cardiff for doing something that isn't a new place and isn't for new people, but actually will be working from an existing church in outreach and in meeting the needs of new people, but it's not a new place for new people. So the funding is not available for that project. And that's what I find frustrating about this, because actually, as many have said, as presbyters, this is what we've been called to do, this is what brought us into ministry in the first place.
And we can't access this funding to work on what we want to do, where God's placed us right here, right now.
Yeah, I do want to stress, we do still have funding available in the District Advance Fund, and that's obviously separate. That money is intending to continue, so it's not going to be phased out. The plan is that the District Advance Fund is still there. The reality is today, we're not spending either the MPMP money or the District Advance Fund in the levels that we could. James.
What is really helpful with the global strategy is the setting of expectation and signalling that this is what this church is interested in. Yeah. And so in conversations with local churches about where we spend our time, our money, it's really helpful to be part of this, even though from experience in Scotland as well, in the role of the conference before, that the criteria for getting the MPMP funding are almost terminally discouraging. That's what I found most discouraging. I see being part of good projects which seem to me to fulfil the spirit of what's been looking at, but very difficult to jump for some groups. And that's maybe where these roles would be helpful in unlocking some of the funding by helping us communicate and plan in a way that meets what connection money is trying to.
Yeah. I think in terms of the funding, there was a clear decision taken by the church, and that essentially it didn't just want to fund projects which were given a fresh coat of paint, but we're going to essentially be doing the same piece of work. They were trying to do something new and innovative, really. But it has obviously made those applications quite difficult. What I will say is, our experience with the God for All team is that when you are able to establish a project, they will support you through some of those stages. And obviously, part of the role of the MPMP lead would be also to support circuits to have those conversations. John? Oh, sorry, Andy.
Reflecting what others have said, really, but I guess there are many of us in this room whisper quietly that feel that we are perhaps making at least some honest success through old places for new people, old places for old people. And I really, we whisper it quietly. We think about youth club or messy church or corporate groups or coffee mornings, lunch clubs and church coach holidays and things, and we're seeing growth and things from that. And as I think I made the point very wisely, we would love to go to employ some very old-fashioned, if I may make the phrase, lay workers, lay pastoral workers, children, youth and families workers, to do the really good things that we know we can do well, which we want to release some volunteers so that they're not very hard-pressed. Because some of these new projects, without going into too much funding detail, which we won't visit at the moment, are painfully risky and painfully damaging when they collapse and fall apart. I think some of us are much better at doing the bread and butter stuff which we love. I whisper it quietly, but my youngsters are playing table tennis, snooker and play board games, and we take old ones on coach holidays to seaside visits like 95-year-olds on the dance floor. And it's incredibly risky, but it's incredibly what we build as community in the process. And there's so much good stuff going on, but it doesn't fit this at all. But if the circuit of the Synod Advance funds are still there and still very much open for applications, then you might have a sea of them
Sorry, I'm conscious I've massively run over time, but...
Just a quick note. Many years ago, I felt the call to plant congregations before I'm old enough to be well before new places and new people. And that's the role I've tried to follow, that obedience in planting congregations. And so we don't fit new places and new people. And as I think about the areas in Wales, there probably aren't new places in which to gather new people because there isn't another building in that area except the chapel. So we're already being disadvantaged. But I think, I don't know any names, sorry, Anne. I think Anne's comment was really, really important. Presbyters are overwhelmed with admin, absolutely. And I think we should think about giving admin support to the presbyters within Wales who seek it. And perhaps one circuit could share an admin assistant for the presbyters in that circuit, and there should be some funding for that, because then it will release people like Anne to have the energy to do the jobs around that we were trained for, not chasing up insurance claims.
Yeah. Yeah, go on, John.
I just have a sort of, I apologise that I have two responses to this and previous slides, I suppose. I read this and my heart sinks. I have a sort of a cynical response, like, who on earth writes all this stuff? And all these descriptions and all these words and faith-rooted community organisers, you know, and it doesn't make...
You should have seen the whole report, I assure you.
That's precisely the point. And I know we have to sort of develop policies and things, but we produce a report saying, you know, we're going to, these are the 4 headings for our future strategy, and then everything has to fit in with that because we said that's what we're going to do. My experience is that whenever I've had a really good plan, where everything has fallen, you know, has come together and we've got just things really, we think we're in God's way and God's blessed us in our choices. 3 months down the line, something happens and we end up somewhere completely different. And I just have this, you know, which is saying the Holy Spirit really does work, you know, and that it often not in the ways that we think it ought to work or he or she ought to work, you know, and we box ourselves in with schemes that make real creativity difficult.
Yeah, I do think within the MPMP process itself, there's an element of they want to see that evolution through the work of the Spirit, essentially. What you really need in order to establish an MPMP is a starting point, a clearly defined starting point, but recognising that may well develop. So I think there is some of that involved in this, but...
May I share a perspective of 45 plus ministries within the Baptist Church, the Baptist Union in Wales, the Baptist Union in Great Britain, the American Baptist Churches USA, and sector ministries, 25 years of chaplaincy, hospital chaplaincy ministry. I think within the Baptist Union there is more of a recognition that local churches, in a sense, have to provide for themselves, although the Baptist Union does provide support and different programs and this, that, and the other. The thing that's impressed me as being going over to the, well, whatever side it is.
well stopped yourself.
We've sold off chapels and we're selling off manses and this, that, and the other. The money goes down to London. Some of it comes back to the circuit. I don't know exactly how much and I don't know what the formula is because I've had enough meetings and I'm supposedly retired. It just seems again that they come up with all of these sort of ideas and programs and this, that, and the other, but you know, one of the good things about chaplaincy is that all hospital chaplaincy in particular was, although there was a degree of administration involved, for the most part we could get on with it. And I found that tremendously fulfilling and worthwhile. When I retired I had post-traumatic stress, but that's another story. But there's got to be realism as well as a vision. And I'm sorry, but in 10 years' time, can the Methodist Church really afford to have all of these people down in London when real ministry, I'm sorry, happens here in the churches and in other situations as well? It's out there in the world, I'm sorry.
And as I said, there is an ongoing conversation happening about the size of the connectional team, and the answer is the connection do not believe they can be the same size in 10 years' time. I mean, that's the reality. Yeah. I could also tell you, I could probably even tell you what the standing order number is if you wanted, but it's 25% of the first 100,000 and 40% of what remains anyway of property sales. But standing order anyway. We should move on. Thank you everyone for that conversation. It's been really helpful to hear, really, and please do pray for this. In terms of the MPMP district lead, we are going to be moving forwards with this. So please pray for the process, because we do think that would be a really helpful role in the life of the synod and support our circuits in what remains a really good opportunity. So, yeah, I'm going to hand back to Jenny.
So, for the last part of our business this morning, I'm going to be speaking the first half in English and the first half in Welsh, but there will be bilingual slides to accompany the Welsh half. Okay, we're really on just bits that we want to introduce and remind you about. This is something coming out of the district chairs meeting and coming out of the wider connection, and it's concerning receiving gifts. Always very nice, or is it? Have you ever received any gifts or gratuities over and above your stipend or your pension in the course of your ministry? I'm not talking about fees for weddings and funerals and so on. I'm not talking about the occasional bag of tomatoes left on the manse doorstep. Don't step on it, it's a bit messy. I was once presented with a large, freshly plucked, oven-ready chicken by a supernumerary's wife. It looked beautiful, but I'm a vegetarian. So I didn't really quite know how to respond. I think I thanked her, but suggested she might offer it to someone in much greater need than I was. I also remember arriving in the vestry on my first Christmas morning in a new appointment and unexpectedly being offered a very big cheque, which completely floored me. Apparently, the church always gave such a gift to the minister at Christmas, but I didn't know. And it panicked me, totally unexpected as it was, and I actually offered it back to the church for its funds. It just didn't feel right. There was something about it that did not feel right. A few months later, an officer of that church was telling me that as they were the biggest church in the circuit and the only church for which I had pastoral charge at the time, I should only lead worship with them on a Sunday, in spite of the fact that I was the super. I disagreed. And I felt very glad that I hadn't accepted their generous Christmas cheque, if you get my drift. Among many things, the ministerial covenant received by conference in 2022 says of ministers, the church expects that you will seek to live within your means, keep accurate records of all gifts and other monies, in addition to your stipend, salary or pension, and abide by the church's policies in relation to occasional fees, gifts and gratuities. This is a heads up for you. This is a heads up for you that the Law and Polity Committee is currently working on such a policy to be brought before the conference. Obviously, when it comes to fees for weddings and funerals, there's an obligation to include them when you do your tax return. When it comes to other gifts and gratuities, the boundaries might seem a little bit blurred to some of us, although HMRC does say that they are taxable earnings. But it's not just about the law. It's not just about the law. As ministers, we still occupy a trusted and influential role in society. We do. And particularly in the life of the church. And in addition to issues of finance, receiving certain gifts is going to give rise to pastoral and other concerns as well. So until this policy and any related standing orders are ready, we are wise to exercise good judgment, as I'm sure we seek to do. I've heard it said that we should speak with our minister in oversight if we receive a gift worth more than £99. We are wise to ask advice and to be open and honest. Financial abuse of people who are at risk is a very real safeguarding issue, and we're obliged to take it as seriously as any other form of abuse, and I hope we will. On the top of a bookcase in my study is a glass candle holder in the shape of an angel. It is not to my taste, but I'd never get rid of it, never, because, and hold yourself together, it was given to me many years ago by the parents of a 15-year-old young woman who was brutally sexually assaulted and murdered, and I conducted her funeral. These are the very gifts that are most precious, I would want to say. And if that's the case, then responding to gifts of money and other valuable gifts is put well into perspective. Something to discuss over your sandwiches, perhaps. So moving on, just to conclude this morning, I'm going to speak in Welsh. Dwi am siarad yn Gymraeg, but there'll be some bilingual slides. And here's the first one. Diw I bawb anturiaethau mewn ymestyn allan. Byddwch chi'n cofio gwahoddiad yma I genhadu o'r synod yn y Dre Newydd yn ôl yn mis Medi, gobeithio. Daeth y syniad o grŵp galwedigaethau y synod wedi ysbrydoli gan tîm...
Sorry, Jenny.
Yeah.
We just keep getting quite a lot of buzzing from time to time. It's intermittent. Oh, is it right?
Ah.
Is that right? Do you want to carry on and we'll see?
Hugo looks like he's pressing some buttons. Yeah? Dyn ni'n trio eto. Okay, trying again. So byddwch chi'n cofio'r gwahoddiad yma I genhadu o'r synod yn y Dre Newydd yn ôl y mis Medi, o dwi'n gobeithio. Daeth y syniad o grŵp galwedigaethau'r synod wedi ysbrydoli gan tîm efengyliaethwf y gyffundeb fel rhan o bolisi diw I bawb yr Eglwys Fethodistaidd. Daeth atom ni fel gwahoddiad a her. Ond I be? Wel, I fentro, I fynd ar antur, I gymryd rhan mewn anturiaeth neu anturiaethau mewn estyn allan. I rhannu cariad Duw mewn ffordd syml iawn efo pobl o'n cwmpas ni, fel capeli, fel cylchdeithiau, fel grwpiau bach neu hyd yn oed fel unigolion. Daeth atom ni I estyn allan, os liciwch chi, wedi canfod pa fath o wahoddiad I ddarganfod cariad Duw yn fwy addas i'r bobl sydd mewn meddwl. Wedi'r cwbl, pwy sy'n nabod ein cymunedau'n well na ni ein hunain. Falle, roeddech chi efo ni mewn un o'r dyddiau arbennig yn yr Hydref, nôl yn yr Hydref, i'n helpu ni baratoi ar gyfer ein hanturiaethau. Roedd na un yn y gogledd ac un yn y de, efo staff, tîm, efengyliaethwf yn ein harwain ni yn ogystal â phobl o'r synod. Yn y bôn, doedd na ddim byd anodd neu ffansi neu gymhleth am y syniadau a geithon ni rhannu. Syniadau meicro genhadaeth, bach iawn. Sgwrsiau ar soffa yn hytrach na ffrygethu o lwyfan. Ymgysylltu â phobl newydd trwy gyfeillgarwch a chynnig cymorth. A syniadau yn tyfu allan o ffordd Fethodistaidd o fyw. Last slide. Mi geithon ni ein gofyn I feddwl ac I weddio ac I ystyried ein syniadau ar gyfer ein hantur ac I roi gwybod I Roxanne Bainbridge o Rhwydwaith Dysgu Cymru Wales mwyn cofrestru ein syniadau. Erbyn hyn, mae nifer go dda o anturiaethau wedi cael eu cofrestru, diwrnod celf, llwybr wyau'r Pasg, caffi, coffi a sgwrs, gwasanaeth Pentecost yn yr awyr agored I enwi dim ond ychydig. Mae Andrew a minnau dal yn gobeithio cynnal ein hantur ni efo'n gilydd, a byddai'n gwneud pererindod neu daith cerdded weddi yn ystod wythnos y Pasg. Os ydych chi wedi bod yn meddwl am fentro ac am gymryd rhan, rwan yw'r amser. Cysylltwch efo Roxanne i ddweud am eich syniadau a byddwn ni'n adrodd yn ôl ac yn dathlu yn y synod ym mis Medi. Dyn ni'n sôn am bethau bach iawn, pethau sy'n dod yn naturiol i ni, fel mae Cathy wedi dweud, ac efo'r potensial i wneud gwahaniaeth mawr. So does gennym ni ddim byd i golli a phopeth i ennill. Amser cinio, lunchtime. Just to say thank you very much indeed for this morning. There will be that plate from the top of the organ by the door, James, if you wouldn't mind. If you have any loose cash on you to offer towards the fund for presbyters, the support of presbyters and deacons, please. I suggest, because we're running a bit over, can we manage to come back, do you think, at 1:20 rather than 1:15? Yes, have an extra 5 minutes in the sunshine. Agweddiwn, let us pray. Diolch yn ei ti o ddiw am ein cymdeithas and enw di. We thank you, God, for all that we have shared this morning, for the privilege of being called to your service. As we join together to eat and share with one another now, we give thanks for our food. We pray for your blessing on those who have prepared it from field to fork. And we remember before you those who do not enjoy the food and the fellowship and the friendship we share. Bendithia ni, bendithiau'n bwyd, bendithiau'n sgwrsiau, yn enw di. Amen. 1:20, if you would, please.